Good morning. Today I want to talk to you about two different things. The first is that today is the beginning of the Triodion period, which is the period of the three odes, Tria Odion, or three odes. And basically what that is it's a time of the year when we hear a specific regiment of readings, and it takes us all the way up to the Anastasi. So it's the pre-Lenten period along with the Lenten period, and each Sunday has a particular a particular theme that is associated with that Sunday. This Sunday, the first Sunday of the Triodion, is the publican and the Pharisee. So we hear about the publican and the Pharisee who went into church to pray, and you can read that in your bulletin. You will hear it as well today. Next Sunday is the prodigal son, the Sunday of the prodigal son, where he went and squandered his inheritance and then returned home to his father. And then we have meat fair and cheese fair Sundays. Now the meat fair, it's interesting that when we talk about Lent, we think that when Lent begins is when we start fasting. But the church actually has instituted meat fair and cheese fair as the Sunday of meat fair as the Sunday that we give up meat. And then cheese fair is the Sunday that we give up dairy products. And then when Lent begins, we give up everything else. But we normally don't do that because there's not a whole lot for us to do after. I mean, if you figure you give up meat, you give up dairy, and then everything else on the beginning of Great Lent, it's more of a monastic fast. And now what we see in our current day and age is that people begin to fast on the day of Great Lent, on that Clean Monday is the beginning of the fast for most people. But the church has instituted those other two Sundays as the last day that we do something. So it kind of weans us off of the foods that we're so used to eating. And then the first Sunday in Lent is, of course, the Sunday of Orthodoxy, when we process with the icons and we talk about how the icons are used in the church and how the Ecumenical Council had spoken about the icons as being part of our worship service. And then the third Sunday in Lent is the veneration of the cross, which is actually the halfway point of Lent and is when we receive the little flowers. And you notice those flowers have a very large stem, and they're like a yellow flower. And they're very strong, and they grow up in places where flowers normally don't grow in toiled areas. So if we see on the side of the road somewhere in a place where normal flowers are unattended, you'll see these particular flowers growing because they're strong. And that's our reminder to ourselves to be strong, and halfway through the fast to remind us that we can sprout out of anything and to become stronger than what we were before the Lenten period. Now, also, what I wanted to talk about, too, was as we know, the Sunday of Orthodoxy, when we process with the icons, that it was part of the Ecumenical Council of one of the last Ecumenical Councils, the Ninth Council, when we hear about icons being brought back into the church. There was problems with the icons. Some people were eating them, some people were burning them, and the church came up with the formulated statement on the icons. But what else I wanted to speak to you about today was, in the first two ecumenical councils, the creed was formulated. And I know that we all say the creed every Sunday. We say it maybe in our own private prayers, and we hear it many times throughout the church cycles of the different services. But the creed was formulated in the first and the second ecumenical councils as a form of coming up with the kind of mission statement of the church, explaining everything that the church is about and what we believe in. But some people have been asking me recently, what is the Filioque clause? And what is that clause in the creed of the Western Church? What I mean by that is the Catholic Church has a specific clause added to the creed that is not in our creed. And Filioque means "and the Son" in Latin. So it's just a fancy word for saying "and the Son," but they call it the Filioque clause. That clause was added in the year 589. in the Council of Toledo in Spain. And it was added to combat the polytheistic people of the time, but also was added in a way to kind of distort the theology and to make a different understanding of what the Holy Spirit is. Now, this clause falls into the creed when we say, I believe in the Holy Spirit who proceeds from the Father, who together with the Father and the Son is worshiped and glorified. In the Filioque clause, it says, I believe in the Holy Spirit who proceeds from the Father and the Son. So that's where that clause is added. Now, Pope Leo of the time in the West rejected the addition, but he liked the theology that it implied by saying that he proceeded from the Father and the Son, which kind of set up like a chain of events. There's the Father, the Son, and the two together, the love of the Father and the Son in the two faces of Christ, somehow made the Holy Spirit, which makes the Holy Spirit less than who he is, which is part of a person of God, a face of God, a hypostasis of God. So we see that this particular clause causes, it has always been an article of confusion and contention between the two churches, because our church believes firmly against the clause, and yet the clause is incorporated in the Western Church. But it is also one of the topics that in the dialogues between the two churches, between the Western Church and the Eastern Church, it's one of the topics that comes up as far as needing to be resolved so that the churches can have a proper creed. Because up until the year 1054, the churches were one. The Western Church and the Eastern Church, or the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, were one church. But in the middle of that, around 589 actually, that clause was added into the creed in the Western side. But you also have to think about nothing in the church is approved, any major changes are approved, unless they happen within an ecumenical council. So the councils that we have I'm sorry, I said the 9th ecumenical council for the icons, and it was the 7th. I'm sorry, there's no 9 councils. I'm thinking the years. But the councils were the church of the 7 councils, 7 ecumenical councils, and the councils kind of formulated everything that we have today. The icons, the creed, the understanding of who Christ is, the understanding of who the Virgin Mary is, and all those things that we have in the church today are incorporated in those councils. So anything that we wanted to change, if we wanted to change fasting, let's say, and we said, well, we don't want to fast Wednesday and Friday, we want to fast Monday afternoons from 2 to 4. We can't just do that. No one can just start that. The patriarch just can't start that. The bishop can't start that. A priest can't start that. But it would have to go through the ecumenical council, which we haven't had one in a very long time. And that's also another, it's on the agenda of things to do in the church. So there's a lot of things that need to be resolved. One of them is also the proper understanding of fasting, and also the church and how we understand other faiths as well. But scholars always talk about this council that's coming. But when it comes and when it will be here and what will be discussed at that is yet to be determined. But I wanted to leave you with those two things today, to think about the clause as you read the creed, and to understand that the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit are one person. It's just 3 dimensions. It's like a triangle. You can't take one out and still have a triangle. You can't put something else in, and one part of the triangle doesn't supersede the other. It's all comes together to make God. So that's why we don't have that clause in the creed. And also to understand that we are in the Triodion period, and this is the pre-Lenten period. So it begins today, and usually in the monastic tradition as well, they have during the Vesper service, right towards the middle of the Vesper service, the book will be on on a table up in front, and the chanter at a particular point will come up and receive the book because it's an actual book with everything in there. He comes and receives the book and then begins to read from the book, and that starts from last night and goes through up until the Anastasy. So just some things. I know there's a lot of information that I went over, and I'm a little confused today too as far as what I'm saying, so I made a couple mistakes too, so we'll see if this gets put on tape or not. And but I pray that you have a blessed Triodion period and that you continue to follow the Sundays, because this particular period, it's like a big blanket, the Triodion period. And whatever's happening during the year, depending on Easter, this just sits right up on top of it. So it doesn't matter what's underneath, that takes precedence over everything else in the church. So the whole feast of Easter and the before and the after. So we have the 40 days before, the Triodion period, and then the 40 days after, and then Pentecost. That whole section just sits on top of whatever the church is doing for the rest of the year and really determines the cycle of the year for us. So now we will begin the liturgy, and I pray that, as like I said, that this period, this pre-Lenten period, along with the Lenten period, is blessed for each and every one of us.